Politics and the law make some pretty strange bedfellows. Hi, it's Pastor Marty from the Afternoon Drive. Welcome to the Tuesday edition. Well, Neil Gorsuch, appointed by Donald Trump to the United States Supreme Court, joined Ruth Bader Ginsburg, appointed by Barack Obama to the Supreme Court. So I think we understand ideologically where these two individuals are coming from. Polar opposite viewpoints. But yet, they agreed in a dissenting decision on Monday that the majority of the court has dealt a blow that will ultimately affect Paul Manafort and his ability, or the potentiality, of his receiving a non-effective presidential pardon. Now, as you know, Paul Manafort has been found guilty of a myriad of charges that range from banking schemes and failure to pay income tax, declare income, etc., of something that happened 20 plus years ago in some of his foreign business dealings. Had nothing to do with Donald Trump or Russian collusion, but of course the Bobby Mueller team stumbled on this, even though the Podestas did it as well. Only Paul Manafort is going to take the hit for it. Yay. That said, had nothing to do with the president, but it was a way they were trying to leverage power over Manafort to be able to get him to roll on, make up stuff about Trump, and it didn't happen. And I'm certain that Paul Manafort was thinking in the back of his mind, I hang tough on this, even if I get tried and convicted, the president will come through with a pardon. Well, the state of New York has its own set of charges that they are bringing against Paul Manafort for basically the exact same things because he was a resident of New York. And so he was found guilty on the federal charges, which if he receives a presidential pardon, that exonerates him from those charges. But the Supreme Court dealt a blow in a decision in an Alabama case that can now be applied to the Manafort case. What was happening in Alabama was an individual on a gun charge and a few other charges, and there is what's called the dual sovereignty doctrine, and it's a matter of interpretation. And Monday, the Supreme Court said, you know what, we support the dual sovereignty doctrine. It kind of throws out the whole double jeopardy clause in the Fifth Amendment, that basically if you are found innocent of charges at the federal level, now the state can come in and bring the same charges and you can be found guilty, or vice versa. And although the dual sovereignty rule is often dubbed as an exception to the double jeopardy right, it's not an exception of all. Now, this is what Justice Sam Alito wrote. So Alito was arguing on behalf of the majority of the court that why having this dual sovereignty, it's not overriding double jeopardy. Well, yeah, it is. Because if you read what Neil Gorsuch wrote in the dissenting opinion, and he and Ruth Bader Ginsburg both agree on this, the state, or the government, we should say, whether it be on the federal level or the state level, doesn't get to keep trying an individual over and over for the same thing until they finally get the result that they like. Boom. Boom. So now, if Paul Manafort is found guilty of the exact same charges on the state level, even if President Trump were to give him a presidential pardon, he can still be convicted on the state level, and the presidential pardon affects nothing on the state level. That's a new gift to us now from the United States Supreme Court. And my question is where was Brett Kavanaugh in all of this? Oh yeah, he sided with the majority. Where were the other so-called conservative justices on this? They voted with the majority. Now, I realize that one of the fundamental key doctrines of the United States is an understanding that we are a collective of individual states, and we are certainly very supportive of the idea, the concept, as is the founders of our federal republic, or I should say our constitutional republic, that we are in favor of states' rights. But I have to point out, as Gorsuch pointed out in historical interpretations, that suggesting that the prosecution in any court, so long as the court had jurisdiction over the offense, was enough to bar future re-prosecution in another court. Now that's the legal precedent. That if one court found you innocent, the next court wouldn't come in and say, you know what, we don't like that. In fact, it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg who wrote, even though we are a collective of states, we are held together by a federal constitution. Remember, initially, when the United States was first formed, we were a confederacy. But yet the confederacy lacked any real power, authority, each state was like its own individual country. And so that's why the framers of our Constitution, while at the same time upholding states' rights, when federal law is finally set by Congress, those who are part of the collective, if you will, the state, if you will, the federal collection of states under the Constitution agree to follow the federal mandate. So now, Paul Manafort, and again, I don't know the man. What he did had nothing to do with President Trump, had nothing to do with Russian collusion. But Paul Manafort, that basically they nailed him on a charge of, money and not following whatever laws were in place at the time regarding declaring of money overseas and paying tax on it, etc. Something that Wall Street businessmen and corporate CEOs do every single day. Paul Manafort found guilty at the federal level. Okay. Maybe he gets a presidential pardon, maybe he doesn't. Maybe Trump had no intention of pardoning him because it happened before Trump even knew the guy, had nothing to do with Trump, and, so be it. But now he's being charged again at the state level. So let's retry him for the same thing and just keep tacking on. Now, why do I have this feeling if Paul Manafort were a liberal Democrat, if Paul Manafort were a member of a minority race, people would be taking to the streets right now. But hey, he's one of those evil corporate Republican guys. Let's get him. Either we are one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, or we're not. The New York State Attorney General said, this proves with the Supreme Court decision that no one in New York is above the law. Really? Unless you're Hillary Rodham Clinton. Because all of the charges that she should be charged with on the federal level, that the Justice Department seems inept, unable, and impotent on pursuing with her. Remember, she's ultimately a resident of the state of New York. We shall see, won't we? That's it. That's my first rant of the day. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, tell somebody about it, and hit the subscribe if you haven't done so already, and smack the bell to get notification of my next rant.